Hello everybody. Today's video is a bit of a serious video. It has to do with ham radios and how they can save your life. Now, a lot of you are probably watching this and you're not a ham radio person and you're thinking, oh, this is just another ham radio video. I'm going to skip over it. Don't skip over. This is for you. This is for you guys who don't have your ham radio licenses. This is for you guys that are thinking about getting your ham radio license. And this is for any of you who, I don't want to say it prepping, but for you guys who are prepping for emergencies, ham radio can be used in your emergency preparations. About a week ago, I was at work and I got a call from my mom, and she seemed kind of hysterical, anxious. And she asked me, have you heard from your dad? I said, no, I haven't heard from Dad. I normally talk to him 2 or 3 times a day, but that particular day I hadn't heard from Dad. And she explained to me that your dad was in a helicopter and he flew up to a mountaintop to do some work. And he called on his cell phone and said, something's wrong with the helicopter. We have to spend the night. Search and rescue. She told me that he didn't say we need search and rescue, or she thought maybe he had called search and rescue. It was kind of unclear, and then his phone died. And she tried to call him back, and I guess it went to voicemail. So we're assuming Dad's phone battery died. So she asked me if I could go and try to get a hold of my dad on the ham radio and find out what's going on. That's not a phone call that you want to get from a loved one. So I told her, stay calm. I'll try to get a hold of Dad. Just try to stay calm and I'll see what's going on. Well, I didn't want to tell my mom that I didn't have my ham radio with me at my work. And so I also tried to call Dad using the cell phone, and it instantly went to voicemail. So at that time, I kind of knew something's going on. So I called my uncle, who is he's my dad's brother. And he's involved in the A.R.E.S for my county. I'm over the A.R.E.S, the Amateur Radio Emergency Services. And he is in the group with us. And I explained to him what was going on, and I asked him if he could get a hold of my dad using the radio. And he told me, well, I'm in a movie theater or getting ready to go see a movie. I'll go home, but he's at least about 45 minutes to an hour out. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if he needs search and rescue, time's of the essence. So I called the next person that I thought that could help me. And he's a really good friend. He's also in the Red Cross for their communications, and he knows my dad really well, and we're a big family in the ham radio community. And I explained to him what was going on, and I was on my way down to Salt Lake to pick up my mom. I work in Park City and live in the Park City area, and I'm at least an hour out to get to Tooele, where I knew that's where we think my dad was at. I was going to go to their emergency operating center. So this gentleman contacted a few other ham radio operators, told them what was going on, and he told them just start flipping through the repeater list, try to find Dave. That's my dad's name. So he calls, I don't know if he called dispatch or if he called emergency management, and informed them or asked them if they knew what was going on, and they didn't know what was going on. So that was kind of news to them too. So now it's starting to get panic mode. It's like, crap, nobody knows if this is, what's going on. I get a phone call about 2:30 from this gentleman in the Red Cross, and he said that one of our fellow A.R.E.S members he made contact with my dad. Excuse me. Anyway, he made contact with my dad on a repeater that blanketed over the Salt Lake area, or that vicinity. He told me the frequency my dad was on, and he agreed with what I was going to do. I was going to go to Tooele County, go to their EOC, and that's where search and rescue, everybody's based out of their EOC. And I figured if anything, I'm going to go there, try to find out what's going on. I pick up my mom from her work on my way to the EOC, and I pick up my brother, who's also a fellow ham. And my sister happened to be there too, so the four of us pile in my mom's car, or I'm sorry, we pile in my sister's car, and we head out to Tooele. And as you can imagine, everything's going through our mind, like, what the heck is going on? Dad's had close calls before with helicopters. You know, he's told us when he's come home, they ran out of gas one time on a helicopter and they auto-rotated down, had a hard landing. There was another time where he was on a mountaintop. The helicopter couldn't land, so he had to like jump onto the skid. Well, just as he was jumping on the skid, that avalanche kicked out from under him and he's hanging onto a skid. So we're thinking, okay, what happened now? No big deal. Dad, you know, he's special forces, he's a tough guy. Nothing can get Dad down. Well, anyway, we get to Tooele County, their EOC, and we're looking around, we don't see Dad. Like, okay, search and rescue hasn't got Dad yet. What's going on? I made contact with one of their employees at the Tooele County Emergency Management Center, which is also the EOC. I explained to him who I was, and you know, I'm a ham radio guy. I'm the A.R.E.S coordinator for Summit County. I'm A.R.E.S, and I've got my NIMS certification. And for those of you who don't know, or a ham radio lingo, NIMS is basically through Homeland Security. It's basically a training that you have to go through in order to go into emergency operating center to use their equipment. It's just a set of guidelines you have to study up on NIMS. But anyway, I explained to them, you know, who I was, my credentials, and they allowed me to go back to their operating center in their EOC, where all their radios were. And he handed me a public service radio, which, you know, their dispatch and everybody was on their 800 megahertz. And he said, what we need you to do sorry, it gets kind of real. What we need you to do is get a hold of your dad, on the ham radio, and then we need you to use our public service radio to direct search and rescue. And it's like, okay. Well, at this time we thought Dad was on a totally different mountaintop called Black Creek. Well, we made contact with Dad on the frequency that I was given by the fellow hams, and come to find out he was on Flat Top Mountain, which, for a search and rescue standpoint, they said that was like the worst case scenario. At least at Black Creek, they said they had supplies inside the shed, or the radio room. Sorry, I don't know why I'm such a baby today. But anyway, they had supplies in Black Creek and a big room where the radios were. Flat Top isn't as equipped with emergency supplies as any of the others, and it's not really even, there's not even a building there. It's more of a, from what I was explained, it's like a 3 foot high by maybe 8 feet long by 4 feet wide metal case where these radios are. And after I made contact with Dad, I was like, what's going on? And I guess he, in the helicopter, went up there. And it's about 10,300-ish feet. And they lost power at the radio site. And that's what his job was for that day. He was going to go find out what's going on. And he went up there to assess only. He was only going to be there 20 minutes. And he found out that they're battery powered only up there. And the solar panels have a little float on them that charge the batteries. And apparently that float, to keep the batteries charged, and then it stops charging, it broke and it overcharged the batteries, and I guess the batteries became damaged, and that's why they lost power up there. So he was going to fix the float, put some new batteries in, but he didn't have the batteries there. He was just assessing. Well, at this time, a storm came in, and visibility was almost nothing from what I understand. Snow came in, and it iced up the rotors on the helicopter. Now, they didn't have pitch, so they could take off. So they tried a few times to de-ice them, what they could, and it didn't help, so they were stuck. And he told us they were on Flat Top Mountain, and now we're thinking, okay, that's why you can't go inside of a building. There's no supplies up there, and Dad only took enough supplies because he was only going to be gone an hour max. So he had on like a Carhartt jacket. He had on I don't know if I want to call them Sorel boots, but they're like a knockoff brand of Sorel boots. And he had a stocking cap, and then his equipment for diagnosing radios and what have you. And then his pilot was worse off than he was. His pilot had, from what I understand, tennis shoes and like a windbreaker type jacket, and that's all he had. So I made contact with Dad, and he told me this story. And we're over the internet, or the radio waves over the whole Salt Lake Valley. Everybody's listening to this that are ham radio operators. The search and rescue came back and wanted me to ask my dad what their current status was. You know, how are they doing, and what supplies have they got? And at this time, Dad's came back and said, well, it's about 8 degrees inside the helicopter. Windows are getting iced over. Wind's blowing about 40 miles an hour. And we think we're getting frostbite, or at least he thought he was getting frostbite on his legs and his foot. And it got so quiet inside that EOC you could hear a pin drop. That became real, you know, that crap. Dad's in trouble. So I relayed that information back to the search and rescue. I'm going to try to do this without losing it. Sorry. So search and rescue came back, and they said, hey, we're having a hard time getting to your dad. We can't get up there with what we thought we had. It's too steep, and we can't get any vehicles up there. We have to reassess. And this was about 8:30, 9 o'clock at this time, so Dad's been up there about 9 hours. And what they were going to try to do is one last ditch effort. They had clear weather down below the mountain, but on top of the mountain the weather was just bad. So they were going to have a helicopter drop off 2 teams of 2 people, so four people. They were going to drop off these teams as close as they could to Dad. The helicopter was able to get within horizontally about 3/4 of a mile horizontally. But vertically, they were about 1,100 feet below Dad. And there's no trail. And one of the searchers told my dad that they were dredging through snow up to their waists, up. I didn't know that at this time. But they told us they were going to have one last ditch effort. They were going to drop off these teams. They're the strongest of the strong searchers. They're taking supplies up to Dad. And they're just taking the bare minimum to sustain life if they can get to him. So we relayed that information back to my dad. And they seemed to be in good spirits. They were cold, of course, and I could just hear it in my dad's voice that he didn't want to come out and say that they were panicking because he knew that everybody was listening, but I could tell. It took the searchers roughly 4.5, 5 hours, I believe, to get to him, but when they thought they were close, they radioed me to have my dad have the pilot turn on the strobe lights of the helicopter. Now at this time, you guys are probably asking, well, why didn't they just use the radio on the helicopter? They would have been fine. Well, I guess the batteries were getting really low on that helicopter, and the searchers told me to tell my dad and the pilot not to use any power that they could in that chopper. They wanted to preserve the batteries to use the strobe lights, because they were going to have the strobe lights basically show them where they're at, because there was no visibility where these guys were. The searchers requested that Dad and the pilot, I guess they called it, charge the strobe lights. So they did a cycle and the battery died, and they did that like 4 or 5 times. They couldn't find them. So I believe at that time they still had to go up more, but 2 of the searchers got what they call altitude sickness, and they had to turn back. And when the searchers told us that, man, it was like getting hit in the stomach. But they said that they were going to have 2 other searchers, another team. They were going to keep moving. Sorry, I'm just a mall baby. But they said that these 2 other searchers, I don't know if they were a husband and wife team or a boyfriend, girlfriend, but they said that these guys are sorry. They said these guys are military. We're going to get your dad out. Man, I'm just a baby. Sorry. Let me get my composure. So anyway, when we feel, we felt that they were going to spend another night on the mountain. Or a night on the mountain, and they weren't equipped with that. So I guess these 2 other searchers, being in the military, they trudged on. And from what I understand, it wasn't just walking up. It was 1 foot, breathe, take a breath, go another foot. For, I think at that point it was another 600 feet in elevation that they had to get there. And we didn't dare tell Dad at this point that 2 of the searchers turned back, because I didn't have it in me to tell him. So we're trying to keep their spirits up. At this point, we had Dad on a 10-minute check-in because I knew his battery was dying in that handy-talkie. His handy-talkie is similar to this that he had. You know, and these, keep in mind, he was on the airwaves since noon, and this is right probably now about 9 o'clock ish, 10:30, right around there. So Dad turned his radio on and he checked in with me and gave us some information to give to the searchers, and the searchers asked us to ask Dad some information, you know, what was going on with them. And we lost contact with Dad. His radio, we could hear him keying up, but we knew that his batteries finally died. So we relayed that information back to search and rescue, and we felt like we were in the dark at this point. I still had contact with search and rescue, but we didn't have any way of contacting Dad to ping their strobe lights or anything, because they had an idea where he was, but I think that they didn't know exactly pinpoint where. They just can go up and look, okay, he's here or there, but keep in mind it was blowing, it was dark, visibility was low. We're freaking out down in the EOC thinking, crap, they lost Dad, you know, or they didn't lose him, I'm sorry, they didn't lose Dad, but we may have lost Dad. I thought my dad was going to die on that mountain that night, and other people did too. They told me that confidentially afterwards. About 20 minutes after this happened, we lost contact with Dad. A few other people inside the EOC start getting a text message, and it was my dad. And we're thinking, wait a minute, Dad's battery was dead on his phone. What the heck? So I guess what he did was he kept his phone what he could with it turned off, and he said it was 1 bar or less on the battery. You know, when your phone gets dead, it keeps giving you that message charged and it alarms out. Well, he kept his battery up next to his body. That heat was trying to keep it warm, and he turned on his phone and he just hit send, or he typed a message to about 4 or 5 people, and he just hit send, and he turned on his phone again, turned it off, turned it on, just in hopes to get it out, and it got out. And what he sent was a frequency. What happened was Dad's battery died on this handy-talkie, and he found another radio in his bag, and I guess it was just an old radio that has just been sitting in his bag forever, and he uses it to test some equipment. But anyway, he gave us a frequency on the 70 centimeter band, or 440, and I got to another radio, programmed it in, and there he was. So, after I kind of scalded him, told him that he scared us, told him that we loved him, the searchers requested that Dad ping the lights one more time. So Dad gave us a 45-second window, because I guess they just couldn't turn on the lights. The strobe light, it was dead. The battery, he said he doesn't know how they did it, that the battery was dead, but they had to charge it. I don't know what that meant. I'm not a helicopter pilot, I'm not a helicopter mechanic, but they had to charge it, and then they got one ping, and the searchers saw it, and we relayed that information back to Dad. And I could hear it in his voice. He was like, oh great, they found us, that's great. But it's not over yet. They still had another hour to get to Dad, but they can visually see that ping on that strobe light. So we're still talking with Dad. We had him on a 10-minute cycle. Turned the radio off. He kept it next to his body to keep it warm, and then he checked in every 10 minutes. Well, the last transmission we got from Dad was searchers are inside the helicopter, and then it went dead. His batteries on that one finally died. But we knew that the searchers were there with them and they had a radio, but it was a different frequency for the 800 megahertz. Well, now we're all excited. You know, they got some, I think they had MREs, and for those of you who've been in the military, these are the old MREs. I want to say he had the peanut butter and crackers, and oh, I can't remember what else he had, but he was never so happy to see these two military guys, well, man, woman, and this couple, husband and wife, or boyfriend, girlfriend. And now they're thinking, we can't get them off the mountain tonight. It was too steep the way they came. Dad's got frostbite, he thought, on his leg. Too steep to go down. They're going to have to spend the night on the mountain. Well, they waited about an hour. And then they finally had a clearing in the weather. And they had about 45 to 50 feet of visibility from what I understand. No, yards. 45 yards of visibility. So they dispatched a second helicopter. They went up there to try to get Dad and his pilot and these two searchers off the hill. But they got close, but they had to turn back. It's just the weather was way too bad. No visibility. And from what I understand, the top of this mountain, it's like a cliff. And they had to hand make the landing pad out of rocks. And they had just enough for 2 helicopters, maybe. So they felt that it was too sketchy to land, and it went back down to a lower altitude and landed and waited for the weather to break. Well, at this point, I didn't know this, but they were going to stop the search efforts for the night, and they were going to spend the night in the helicopter. And it's getting about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. Dad's been up on the hill over 12 hours. And I guess the helicopter pilot decided to go one last time. And luckily they were able to go up. And Dad's pilot was able to talk their pilot down to a safe landing zone. And they all got on the hill, or off the hill. So anyway, now that we're doing our after action reports, for those of you who are in A.R.E.S or know the ICS forums and what have you, the after action report was what did we learn from it, and this is what I want to talk to you guys about. I know it's a kind of a lengthy video, but for those of you who don't have your ham radio license, get it. It could save your life, just like what happened with my dad. And for those of you who are looking at a radio, like I said, Dad had this type of radio. It's just a Kenwood. But what he didn't have, and all of my A.R.E.S guys know that we need it, it's called a clamshell. And what a clamshell is, this is a regular battery right here. Just a regular battery you drop in a charger. I don't know if you see that one behind me, it's charging. But what all of my A.R.E.S guys and other A.R.E.S members are required to have for every one of their radios, it's a battery. It's just like the original, you know, the one that you charge, but it has AA batteries. So what I'm telling you guys, if you get a radio, a ham radio, get a clamshell and take 24 hours worth of batteries. That's probably, this one takes 4 batteries, so take 20 batteries with you. You know, they're not that much, but it can save your life. That was one of the things that was brought up in our after action report that I'm going to do, is Dad didn't have a clamshell for his radio, but guess what he's getting for Christmas? He's getting a clamshell. Hope you don't see this, Dad. Another thing that you guys could do is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term 1 is none and 2 is 1. Have a secondary backup radio. This one is really cheap, and this one only, runs off of AA batteries. I keep this one in my snowmobile pack, and I use it, or I turn it on about once a month. Output power on it I think is only like 4 or 5 watts. But I'm in my basement and I just hit a repeater 20 miles away using 4 watts of power. This can save your life. They're cheap, and batteries. Make sure you get the clamshells or another radio that takes double A's. Another thing you guys could do is once you get your ham radio license, get involved. Get involved with A.R.E.S. Get involved in races. That's what gave me my training, so I knew what to do when I got to the EOC. And you do simulated emergency traffic with these A.R.E.S and races. So I'm just begging you guys, if you go out there in the back of the country, take a radio, get your ham radio license. It could save your life. Lastly, I just want to thank some people that helped out my dad. First of all, I want to thank, I'm not going to say their last names, but I want to thank Bob, KF7EUW, for everything he did. He helped on the radios, contacted Dad too. I want to thank Gary, KC7EPY. Without him, I don't know, he contacted the search and rescue, and he kept in contact with me when he was talking to Dad. I want to thank Kelly, I forgot his call sign. I think it's KD7IMZ. I'm sure I got it wrong, Kelly, but thank you for what you did. I want to thank John, K7JL. We used his equipment that my dad was talking on, and he was able to turn off the networks or the links so we can keep in communication with Dad. There's just so many people. Morris, 87MV, 87SR, I believe. I'm sorry, Morris, if I got your call wrong. 87SR, I think. But anyway, Morris, you know I'm thinking of you. Thank you for what you did. And everybody, I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. I know I got kind of a little teary-eyed, but thinking that, you know, what could have been, and it just gets me. Hope you learned something from this video. Makes you think. I hope you guys are thinking, man, I better get my ham radio license. Even though if it's an emergency, you don't need a license. Anybody could have talked on that radio. If it's to sustain life or property, anybody can get on the radio. You don't need a license. You just have to say a few words. This is an emergency. Give your name. But it's better to have your license so you can get the training. And feel free to share this if you want. I don't know if many people are going to want to watch a crying boob on the YouTube, but it's a good training exercise video. What to do. Feel free to thumbs up and subscribe. But lastly, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate you guys. And hope you have a great day. And go get your ham radio license, everybody. 73s. Bye-bye.